Hello and welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. This is the show where we get to answer your questions. So if you've got a good question about mountain biking or alternatively cutting your own hair at home, get in the comments using the hashtag AskGMBNTech or hashtag MakingTheCut. Anyway, on with the show. Okay, so the first question this week is from Edgar Soler, and they say, "Hi guys, I love the videos," which is good to hear. They're having a few brake issues. I'm running a Shimano XT M8-120, the 2020 model, and every time I center the caliper properly at my home and spin the wheel, everything is perfect with no noise. The problem is that when I go for a ride and I start to descend and start braking hard, my front brake starts making noises. The rotor touches the pad, then even when he's not braking. And when I get home, I sometimes need to recenter the caliper. I've got a secondary question in there as well, which I'll get back to. This sounds like a weird one. Shimano is normally really good for running a decent amount of rotor clearance at the pads. It sounds like, if you're getting heavy on the brakes and then, you're putting a lot of heat through the system, sometimes you do get a bit of wavy washer sort of thing. I would say, go back to basics, make sure that every time you realign the caliper, you are bedding in the brakes properly, because this is going to give you the most pad clearance possible by wearing the pads inappropriately. I would say maybe think about using some of those, you get those cone washers, those two washers that bind together. What they're really good for is if the frame or the fork isn't faced perfectly. What I mean by that is it's not faced in such a way that the caliper is going to sit exactly square and it's a bit of a tilt. Although those can compensate for that. It's a difficult one. I would say, make sure everything's bedded in properly, and maybe make sure that everything's faced correctly. It shouldn't be making any noise. I mean, sometimes you do get a bit of, as the disc is cooling down, you get that kind of turkey gobbler noise. But it should be okay. Okay, so secondary question. Edgar wants to know why RockShox and Fox don't just make it 203mm rotors as standard for their forks. It's a good question. I think a lot of people still over fork their bikes. I've got that Reactor, which is a super capable trail bike, but on it I run 180mm rotors because I want something light. I think for lighter riders, for people that maybe don't do so much descending, it's good to have options. I think adding a 20mm adapter is fine. I think when you go above that, 40 or dare I say even 60mm, under high load you do get some flex, which is going to compromise braking. But I think adding 20mm is fine, and it gives more options. You can't have it both ways. If we all did that way, it'd be a load of people saying, why don't they give us the option? So I think adaptability is the best option. Okay, now next question is from Daniel Merg, and he says, "Aloha, dear Henry, nice. Recently sent his RockShox Monarch in for a service to have some issues, and Sam reported that there was some scoring on the damper shaft. And they basically recommended that he make sure all the pivot bolts are nicely torqued and checked. Basically, his concern is that all the bike is relatively well maintained, or very well maintained, all torqued correctly, and there's no play or anything. And where's this coming from? Because he doesn't feel like he's at any fault, and it's just something that's kind of happened to him. How to put this delicately? It happens, okay? Some bikes, especially bikes that have a large yoke driving the shock, a long yoke, that basically means there's loads of force being actuated upon the shock because it's basically a massive lever. There are some downhill bikes that consistently snap coil shocks. When you go to a larger diameter external shaft, such as on an air shock, some bikes actually rely on that for stiffness, which is obviously not the way it should be, but it kind of is the way that it is. I think sometimes when you go to a coil shock, you notice it being so much more supple. Undoubtedly, that is less breakaway force needed to get the bike into its stroke. But I've often wondered if you ever go for a bike that sometimes, really, you feel like binding up in the mid-stroke, and then you put a coil on there, it feels so much more fluttery everywhere. And I often wonder if that's not sometimes because of the smaller diameter shaft. It's probably not doing anything good to the shock because it's coping with the flex even worse, but in terms of performance, it's really interesting. I've heard of people getting around this problem using, I believe it'd be like a spherical eyelet bushing, which is more common on like EXT shocks now, or fast suspension. It is a problem. What I would do, my recommendation would be just be very open with SRAM and just say, this is the bike I've got. Have you noticed anything happening with these bikes? Because you want to be protected under warranty, or whatever is your deal. And you don't want to, I think it's really good to be upfront with that straight away and say, listen, if this is happening on all these bikes, then just so you know, you're going to be getting this shot back again. Because what can you do? So I don't really have an answer on how to remedy that, but I would just say it's worth continuing the dialogue with the service centre to try and make everyone aware of the situation. Now we have a question from Patrick, and they say, hi Doddy and Henry, I suffered a serious foot injury in October 2018. Well, sorry to hear it, and he's in the last bits of recovering. Well, glad to hear it. His question is, my bike has been standing still since the injury. What maintenance would we recommend doing, apart from the obvious, like, bolts, tyres, brake checks? Should I bleed the brakes? Maybe a lower leg service? Honestly, if it's been just, stood as is, I would probably recommend giving the rotors a wipe down, just basically to make sure they're not contaminated with dust. Maybe just with a dry cloth, don't need to put anything on it, but just wipe down your brake pads just to remove any dust. It shouldn't have contaminated the pad, but just you don't want to be running the risk. I rebed in the brakes, and sometimes when you leave suspension for a long time, and I mean a really long time, and the internal seals were dry to begin with, they can adhere a bit, and then so it feels lots of stiction, and then you get it into the stroke, and it's almost like it cracks, and it does tear the seal a bit, which can give you problems. But that is because it wasn't assembled right in the first place. So if you weren't having problems before, I wouldn't imagine it'd be a problem now. But if your forks really don't want to go into the travel, or your shock really doesn't want to go into the travel, then I would suggest just not just forcing that through. What would I do? I think just bolt check, wipe down the chain, inflate the tyres, give the brakes a quick check, and I think you'll be good to go. Good to hear you're back on the bike. Nice one, mate. Next, we have a question from ZYX from Zeeks. Zeeks. Nice. And he says, I know this is a weird question. Good start. But let's just say my bike broke and I welded it back together. What will happen? I like that we're dealing in hypothetical situations here. Well, it depends how good you are of a welder. This has been done before, obviously. I think it was Ben Reed back in the day. He wanted to short the chainstays of his Giant, so he just cut a section out and just, slammed it together. Honestly, it probably depends how much you treasure your pearly whites and your good looks. If, for instance, you had a bike that you knew had broken and you didn't care and you wanted to practice and see what it would take, then why not? But I probably wouldn't go hucking your meat straight away after welding up a bike that you desperately want to race on, or So I'd be sensible. I've had friends that have done this. My friend wanted to run larger wheels in his old Iron Horse, so he's done it and he's still going strong. Oh man, who can I say? I think to protect me from any legal footing, I would say don't do it. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But if you are going to do it, be careful. Now we have a question from Mr. Twix, and he says, why do we clamp bikes by the seat post and not the frame when working on a work stand? Well, there's convenience, obviously. Just a really good place to put it, really. But, I've seen people, actually saw one guy once, trying to get around. He didn't want to clamp it on his expensive dropper seat post, so he clamped it on the top tube. Then as he was removing the bike from the stand, he accidentally took a massive chunk out of his damper shaft and his shock. But I guess that's probably more of a common occurrence, that sort of problem now, when we've been clamping our bikes by the seat post for a very long time. I would say that whilst our bikes are probably, you imagine you have a bike that's really, the ride's great and it handles all the necessary forces. It might not handle the clamping forces on, say, the top tube. That's because that top tube was never designed to be clamped. A really good example is Colnago, who make Italian road bikes. They made this road bike a couple of years ago. I don't know the name of it, but It rode great, it was light, they were really happy with it, but they kept breaking frames. And what it wasn't anything that was happening whilst they were riding, but it was Italians' propensity to sit on the top tube at traffic lights and coffee shops. And that's what's breaking the frame. You know, you might have seen sometimes you can actually, on carbon frames, you can actually squeeze and see how much they flex. And it's because they do have design constraints. And one of those constraints is making the bike not only resistant to braking and strong and stiff, but it's also light. You know, it's also, you know, vibration damping, it's all these other things. And so that top tube, whilst might be perfectly adequate, more than adequate for general riding and pushing the bike really hard, it might not handle clamping forces or whatsoever. The seat post, on the other hand, is not only suitable to clamp and good at resisting those forces, but if you did have a nightmare and for some reason it breaks, well, it's not really an issue, is it? Because it's a lot less expensive than a frame. I think that, you know, I'll always clamp my seat post right on the dropper. It doesn't bother me, just make sure that the stand is in good nick. You know, it's not like old sandpaper, it's nice and clean. And yeah, I think it's absolutely fine. I think yeah, it's not a problem. I would just continue to do it like that. And I would say, to save yourself any nasty surprises, stay away from the top tube. Anyway, that is it for this week's Ask GMBN Tech. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been fun just doing it in the comfort of my own home this week. If you've got your own question, or like I said, any tips for styling your Barnet, get in the comments below. Help us. I think I've got about a week left, then I'm just going to go buzz cut. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.